After a perfunctory first practice in Mexico, given really to many of the young drivers who replaced the big names, a few exceptions, but generally speaking, the track was also very dusty and dirty in that first session. The action really began in the afternoon in the second session. They went out on mediums initially. Like Austin, Pirelli here have the medium and the soft pretty closely matched and quite a big gap to the hard. So we barely saw the hard being run at all today. And of course, for many of the drivers, there were not that many laps to bed the car in on mediums because they hadn't driven in the first session. And then it was straight onto the soft. So let's have a look and see how it panned out when they did that. Max Verstappen did one lap, 17.3, and it was comprehensively quicker than anyone else. He wasn't that happy with the car. There were still some question marks about traction, front flap they were still playing with, but normal stuff on a Friday. And don't forget, of course, that the track was still evolving at this point. Charles Leclerc was very quick. He was one of the drivers that did run like Oscar Piastri in the first session. Charles Leclerc 17.5 for Ferrari, showing that Ferrari are going to be very competitive this weekend. We'll have a look in a minute at the top speeds as well. Kimi Antonelli also ran this morning, 17.5. Very good job for Mercedes. Lando Norris out a little bit later than the others on the soft tyre. The track was probably a little bit quicker at that point. Didn't get in a great lap, but 17.6. Lewis Hamilton similarly out a little bit later, 17.6. George Russell, 17.8. Yuki Tsunoda, 17.8, going quite well. Again, Fernando Alonso, 17.9, kind of under the radar. Carlos Sainz, 17.9. A little bit annoyed, no doubt, to see that they have indeed changed the angle of the curb at turn 2, about which we spoke with Mark Slade, one of the key elements of Carlos's performances in Mexico over the last few years, and of course that brilliant win last year for Ferrari. He's really good over the curbs at turn 2. Does something there that not many other drivers can match. Anyway, the trucks were out on Thursday changing that curb. They won't say exactly how, and it wasn't listed in any of the notes from the race director, but that curb is now different. So probably some of Carlos's advantage has been taken away. For what reason? Who knows? Lance Stroll 17.9 in the other Aston, Liam Lawson 18.2, and then Oscar Piastri again looking a little bit lackluster in the other McLaren, even though he did run on Friday morning in the first session, 18.2. So at that point you'd say, wow, Max Verstappen looking really good out of the box in the Red Bull, and indeed he is, no doubt about that. But how was it going to pan out when they started to put fuel in the car? I've got representatives there of the 4 top teams, and look at the number of laps Max Verstappen did. After he did that quick time on the soft tyre, he came straight in, put fuel in the car, and he was the first out on mediums to start that long run. That's how he managed to get in so many laps. Everybody else a little bit behind the 8 ball, set by Max. Yet again, Max and Red Bull, got to say. And you can see there on his medium, bearing in mind at this point, of course, at the beginning of the run, he's probably running more fuel than any of the others. You have to take that into account. But Lando Norris looking very, very good alongside Max on the medium tyre there. Lando 21.4, 21.2, ending on a 22.3 before he did a couple of slow laps, and then right at the end a 21.0 on the medium, which kind of took everybody's breath away. Max at that point, the only driver apart from George Russell to do so, but he got in a better run right at the end. Max with George, the only one to run the medium and the soft in direct comparison. So that's another very good bit of homework by Red Bull. But on the medium, very consistent around the mid 22s, but nothing like as quick as Lando, which would suggest, as I say, a difference in fuel. But by the end, with Max having done more laps, you have to say they're about commensurate with fuel. And Max coming in for a used set of softs that he'd run earlier, of course, 21.1, 21.0, Lando Norris on the medium. So it's going to be close between those two. Charles Leclerc, very consistent as well. Got to bear in mind, again, probably not running quite as much fuel as Red Bull, but very good runs by Charles Leclerc. But going off quite dramatically, typical Ferrari being a little bit harder on their tyres. Look, those last 3 or 4 laps on the Ferrari going away. And George Russell in the Mercedes. Kimi Antonelli pretty near him on everything he did. George right at the end doing a 21.3 on the soft tyre. That's about representative, 2 or 3 tenths away from Red Bull all day. But again, a reasonably good run on the medium tyre. So classic George, classic Mercedes. Expect them to be there when the race proper gets underway. But also bear in mind the track is going to pick up a lot of grip tomorrow. No rain at this stage predicted. And then finally, let's have a look at the top speeds on the soft runs. Critical in Mexico, of course. It's a very long straight, 1.2 kilometers, just under a mile. That has a big bearing on the lap time, obviously. But again, we have the pattern of those who are super quick on the straight, not necessarily following that through with a lap time. The other factors in Mexico, it's a circuit very high in altitude, 2,200 meters, so the cars generate much less downforce than normal. On top of that, curbs are really important. Brakes, tyres get very hot, particularly with the medium and the soft being so close to one another. A lot of the teams, particularly Red Bull, appearing with more louvers on the car, Red Bull and Ferrari, to get a lot more cooling for the brakes and to some extent the engine. Interestingly, McLaren making no real changes in the cooling area on their car. But let's have a look at the top speeds. Williams, Mercedes, 358 in a straight line. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? 358 kilometers an hour from Alex Albon. Charles Leclerc just behind that, 355. Now, I said when we were looking at the soft tyre runs that bear in mind how quick the Ferraris are in a straight line. They do therefore have, seemingly on this Friday at least, a pretty good race package. Quick around the lap and also a straight line speed advantage, which is no mean thing around Mexico. Nico Hülkenberg in the Sauber Ferrari, 355. Lewis in the other Ferrari, 351. Maybe running more wing, not quite as quick as Charles today, but still looking pretty good when he's in the car, quite balanced and doing the usual Lewis thing, turning a little bit later than we're used to seeing him prior to 22, but looking pretty good and confident and comfortable in the car. Kimi Antonelli also very good, 349. Fernando Alonso, 349 in the Aston. That's a bit of a surprise to see Aston that quick in a straight line. Fernando will be pleased about that. George Russell, 348 in the other Merc. Yuki Tsunoda, 348. And look where Max Verstappen is, 346, down with Lando Norris, 344. But the two quickest drivers in terms of the fuel run, and to some extent Lando, give or take some laps when he had a bit of a misfire out of the pits, very quick on the soft tyre, but both of them relatively slow in a straight line, which suggests of course that they are generating a lot of downforce on those cars and it's serving them well for the rest of the lap. Oscar Piastri a little bit quicker, again suggesting maybe he's running slightly less wing and maybe we'll see some changes to that tomorrow. Also, you'd have to expect that maybe Red Bull will take some wing out of the car, some front flap or whatever they can do to get more top speed, because they do look to have a pretty good car around the lap as a whole. Other than that, a relatively straightforward day. It was really just that afternoon 1 hour session that brought everything back into focus again for this amazing World Championship, as it is right now, with Max Verstappen still very much in the running, mathematically at least, in the Drivers' Championship, trying to put together yet another perfect weekend. It's almost as difficult as knowing why you're quick in Formula One, trying to put a perfect weekend together without really thinking about it and just going about it in the normal way is a very difficult thing to do. But so far, it looks as if Red Bull are doing that. McLaren look to be about where they've been recently, with Oscar Piastri not looking that impressive so far. Lando Norris looking by far the sharper and more polished of the two drivers. It is early days though. We'll see how it progresses over the weekend. And I guess the big news is that Ferrari are back in the frame again, at least up there with Mercedes, and potentially challenging for somewhere near the front of the grid. Although, as we said in the chat with Mark Slade, and indeed in the live stream, in the build-up to this, being on the front row, being on the pole in Mexico isn't necessarily a massive advantage, not as it is at other circuits, because it's such a long run down into the first corner, and even without DRS, you can get a tow, and you are a bit of a sitting duck on the pole. But anyway, that's a long way away. Well, it's 24 hours away, and I don't think anyone tomorrow will be driving not to be on the pole if they can possibly be there. Anyway, we'll see what happens tomorrow. Big crowd in Mexico, great atmosphere, and in that stadium section, that's unique in Formula One, that really. They tried to create that in Miami, but it works really well in Mexico. But this circuit has a lot of heritage, a lot of history as well, named after the two brothers, Ricardo and Pedro Rodriguez. And you can see there behind me, a replica of Pedro Rodriguez helmet, courtesy of my friend Diego Moreno. Thank you for that, Diego. Anyway, we'll see you tomorrow. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to TrackNinja, and to REC Watches. Take care.